The folding chair snapped beneath Emily, and the giant man everyone feared did not laugh. The crack echoed through the bridal agency's marble showroom like a gunshot no one was brave enough to name. Every woman in the waiting area turned at once. Silk dresses rustled. Coffee cups paused halfway to painted lips. And there, in the center of that polished room built to sell fantasy, Emily Carter was suddenly on the floor in a storm of broken metal, cheap lace, and heat rising so fast into her face it made her eyes sting. She was 29, plus size, chronically awkward, and far too familiar with public embarrassment. But humiliation still had a fresh edge when it came dressed in witnesses. "Oh my God," one consultant whispered, not quietly enough. Another woman gave a brittle laugh. Maybe they should reinforce the furniture before inviting certain body types. Emily pressed one palm to the tile and tried to stand before anyone could offer pity. Pity was always worse. Her sample bouquet had rolled under a glass table. One shoe had slipped off. The delicate ivory sleeve of the dress she had borrowed for the consultation had torn beneath the arm. She wanted to disappear so badly her body seemed to fold inward, shoulder first, as if shame itself had weight. Then she saw the shoe stop in front of her. Black leather, hand-stitched, massive. The room had been waiting for him all morning, though no one had said it directly. Victor Moretti did not need introductions in this city. His name traveled ahead of him through restaurants, contracts, police stations, and frightened men. He owned buildings, shipping routes, judges' favors, and the kind of silence money alone could not buy. He was enormous, well over 6.5 feet, broad enough to make tailored wool look strained at the seams, and women had rejected him for reasons they disguised with polite language. Too intense, too frightening, too much man, too large to fit the image they wanted beside them in photographs. He had come for a practical arrangement, not romance. A wife to satisfy an old family condition tied to inheritance and power. A contract, a public role, nothing soft, nothing sentimental. And now he was looking down at a woman on the floor while half the room tried not to smirk. Emily braced for the same expression she had seen all her life, that quick flash of assessment, dismissal, relief that they were not her. It never came. Victor crouched. The movement alone stunned the room. Men like him were not supposed to bend for anyone. Yet there he was, lowering all that height and force until his shadow shielded her from the circle of staring faces. His hand reached past the broken chair, retrieved her fallen shoe, and set it beside her with impossible care. "Don't get up too fast," he said. His voice was low, controlled, carrying the kind of authority that made people obey before they decided to. Emily looked at him, startled into stillness. Up close, he was even more intimidating, scar near the jaw, dark eyes sharp enough to pin a lie to the wall. But there was no mockery in them, only attention, direct and unsettling. The agency director rushed forward with a smile stretched thin over panic. "Mr. Moretti, I'm so sorry you had to walk in on this. We can move to a private suite." Victor did not stand. The director's smile held for exactly 2 seconds before it cracked at the edges. Fluorescent light flattened every face in the bridal agency's front salon, turning the gold-framed mirrors harsh and the white gowns ghostly. Fabric rustled somewhere in the back. A receptionist stopped pretending to organize veils. Every eye drifted to the enormous man seated in the consultation chair like it had been built for someone half his width, and then to the woman still standing near the sample aisle with a fallen clipboard at her feet. "No," he said, voice low enough to force everyone else to lower theirs. "We stay here." The room obeyed. Emily felt heat climb up her neck, not from fear alone, but from the awful instinct to disappear when richer, sharper people started speaking over her. That had been the pattern for years. Apologize. Step back. Make yourself smaller, even when the world had already decided you were too large. But the man in front of her had interrupted that pattern simply by refusing to look away. The director clasped her hands. "Mr. Moretti, there has clearly been a misunderstanding. We only wanted to ensure a suitable match." "A suitable match," he repeated, as if testing how ugly the phrase sounded in open air. His gaze shifted, not to the director, but to the row of profile folders spread across the glass table. Emily saw what he saw then. Typed notes, lipstick-smudged business cards, and one open file with comments scribbled in the margin. Too big. Bad optics. Intimidating in photos. Difficult to place. Those weren't comments about the brides. They were about him. A silence spread so fast it felt physical. Not the silence of fear this time, but exposure. The kind that stripped a polished room down to its rotten beams. Emily watched his expression change by less than an inch. No outburst. No slammed fist. Just a stillness colder than rage. Who wrote that? He asked. The receptionist looked down. The consultant who had laughed earlier crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. No one wanted ownership now. Emily could have stayed quiet. It would have been safer. The agency was one of the few places in the city that had agreed to interview her for steady work. She needed the paycheck, needed the bus fare, needed not to go back to choosing between rent and groceries by Thursday night. Instead, she bent down, picked up the clipboard she had dropped, and took one step forward. "You did," she said, looking at the consultant. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "At 10:15. You said a man his size made women nervous before they even learned his name. Then you laughed and asked if the photographer could use a wider lens." No one moved. The consultant flushed crimson. "That is not what It is," Emily said. "And when I asked if that was professional, you told me to focus on steaming dresses." There it was. Not rescue. Witness. Victor turned his head toward her slowly, as if recalculating the entire room. Most people folded under his attention. Emily nearly did. But humiliation had burned through enough of her life to leave one stubborn thing behind. A hatred of cruelty when it dressed itself up as good manners. The director rushed in. "Emily is new. She may have misunderstood the tone of our office." "I understood it perfectly," Emily said. That sentence cost her. The silence after her answer did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like the second before a chandelier fell. Across the bridal agency's front salon, the women in cream suits stood frozen beneath the cold fluorescent lights, their practiced smiles pinned in place and dying by degrees. Emily could feel the heat in her own face, the sting in her palms where her nails had pressed half-moons into the skin, and the terrible awareness that rent was due in 10 days. She had not only corrected the director in front of the most feared client in the room. She had done it while standing beside a broken folding chair, one heel slightly bent, her blouse still wrinkled from a rushed bus ride across town. Dignity, in places like this, was always expensive. The director's voice came back first, sharpened now. "Go bring Mr. Moretti the portfolio from the private consultation suite." It was not a request. It was punishment in silk. Emily knew at the moment several women lowered their eyes to hide their relief. The private suite was where high-value clients were handled with polished flattery and trained charm. She was being sent in alone not because she was trusted, but because if she failed, the blame would land cleanly on her. "Now," the director added. Emily turned toward the hallway lined with gilt mirrors and pale roses arranged to look effortless. Her steps were measured, but inside, her stomach dropped hard. She had barely been hired. She did not know the client protocols, did not know which names were dangerous, and did not know why the room reacted to Victor Moretti as if gravity itself answered to him. She only knew what she had seen, a massive man in a charcoal suit, silent while others laughed, with hands like carved stone and eyes that missed nothing. The private consultation suite sat at the end of the corridor behind a frosted glass door. Softer light glowed inside. Leather chairs, a walnut table, a silver tray with untouched espresso. Wealth arranged itself there in whispers instead of shouts. Victor was already inside. He had somehow crossed the room before she reached the door, and the sight of him up close nearly stopped her. He was larger than size alone could explain, broad through the shoulders, thick through the chest, heavy with the kind of force that made furniture look temporary. Men that size usually carried themselves carelessly, accustomed to space yielding before them. Victor did not. Every movement looked controlled, compressed, as if he had learned young that the world judged his body before it heard his voice. Emily stepped in with the portfolio pressed too tightly against her ribs. Then the disaster began. Her heel caught in the seam where the rug met the marble threshold. The portfolio flew from her hands. Thick sample books burst open in the air. Satin swatches, contract folders, and glossy photographs of wedding gowns scattered across the floor like stunned white birds. For one awful second, Emily simply stared. Then she dropped to her knees. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She reached for a folder at the exact moment Victor bent down for the same one. Her forehead struck his jaw with a dull crack. He froze. She froze harder. The room held its breath. A red line appeared where the edge of a metal binder had scraped across Victor's knuckle. The thin red line on Victor's knuckle brightened before it darkened, a small injury made startling by how still the room had gone. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. A dropped satin catalog lay open at Emily's knees, its smiling bride folded under her palm. Somewhere near the reception desk, a woman let out a nervous breath and quickly swallowed the rest of it. Emily jerked her hand back as if she had burned him. "I'm so sorry." Victor touched his jaw once, more in surprise than pain. The scrape on his hand should have looked minor on any other man. On him, with that massive frame bent over scattered wedding folders and crushed lace samples, even a paper-cut-sized wound made the whole scene feel strange, intimate, and unbalanced. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet calculation that unsettled everyone more. The director rushed forward first, smile stretched too tight. "Mr. Vale, please forgive this chaos. We'll have someone escort her out." That was what the room expected. Removal, correction, disposal. Emily heard it before the words finished landing. She rose too quickly, nearly stepping on the torn hem of a sample veil. Her cheeks were still hot with humiliation, but something steadier had begun to harden underneath it. "No," she said, voice soft but clean. "Don't escort me anywhere. I'll leave on my own." Victor straightened to his full height, and the air changed with him. Jackets shifted. Eyes dropped. The bridal salon, so cruel a moment ago, suddenly seemed too small to hold the fact of him. "You won't be leaving," he said. The director blinked. "Of course. We can prepare the private suite." "I wasn't speaking to you." The room went silent. His gaze returned to Emily. "You said everyone here understood exactly what this place was." Emily swallowed. "Yes." "And you still answered honestly." "That was expensive," she said before she could stop herself. For the first time, something almost like recognition moved through his expression. Not amusement, not pity, recognition. He turned toward the director, who was already paling beneath her makeup. "You sell appearances," Victor said. "I came for a contract, not theater. Bring the legal papers." The director's composure cracked completely. "Mr. Vale, with respect, these arrangements require compatibility reviews, image consideration, family screening, public implications." "Bring," he repeated, "the papers." No one argued after that. The conference room they moved to was colder than the front salon, all smoked glass, chrome trim, and bottled water no one touched. Rain had started outside, tapping against the high windows in a dry, steady rhythm. Emily sat at the far end of the long table with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles ached. Across from her, Victor seemed built from darker material than the room itself. Black suit, broad shoulders, controlled silence. The attorney arrived within 10 minutes, carrying a leather portfolio and the cautious face of a man who had learned not to ask his richest client unnecessary questions. The contract was set between them. A 1-year marriage. Publicly valid. Privately negotiated. Separate bedrooms if requested. Financial support regardless of emotional outcome. Protection under Victor's name and household authority. No forced intimacy. No false declarations of love. Mutual appearances at designated events. A confidentiality clause sharp enough to cut. Emily read every line. That alone changed something. Most people in that world signed things to survive them. She read to understand them. Morning in the house did not arrive with warmth. It arrived in layers of controlled silence. The hush of expensive carpet swallowing footsteps, the low click of security locks releasing in sequence, the distant hiss of an industrial espresso machine somewhere below. Sunlight came in through tall steel-framed windows and landed across black stone floors, so polished they reflected the ceiling like dark water. Nothing in that place invited clumsiness. Nothing in it forgave being seen. By the time Emily came downstairs, dressed carefully in a soft navy-wrapped dress she had ironed twice, the household had already arranged itself around rules no one had explained out loud. Men with earpieces nodded but did not smile. 2 women in fitted charcoal uniforms at the serving station glanced at her wedding ring before glancing away. A house that large could have felt grand. Instead, it felt disciplined, like a fortress pretending to be a home. Breakfast had been set at the far end of a dining table long enough to make affection impractical. White porcelain. Silver flatware. Coffee dark as oil. Victor was not there. His chair remained empty at the head, a physical fact that somehow still controlled the room. That was when Emily understood the first truth of living under his name. Even absent, he was still the temperature. A woman in her 50s, erect as a ruler and severe in a black suit, entered with a tablet tucked under one arm. Mrs. DeLuca, the house manager, had the kind of face that had forgotten how to be surprised. Her gaze moved over Emily's dress, shoes, hair, posture, not rudely, not warmly, just thoroughly. "Breakfast is served from 6 to 8, she said. "Mr. Moretti's schedule changes by the hour. Yours will be provided each evening. Staff entrances are on the east side. Family areas are unrestricted unless security advises otherwise." It sounded less like a welcome than orientation at a private prison. Emily folded her napkin onto her lap. "Thank you." Mrs. DeLuca's eyes flicked once to the plate in front of her. "Fruit, eggs, toast. Measured portions. If you require accommodations," she said, "the chef can prepare alternatives with advance notice." The sentence was polished. The insult under it was not. Emily looked up. "I eat regular food." For the first time, one of the younger maids at the sideboard nearly smiled before suppressing it. The room did not thaw, but it shifted. A little later, Emily made the mistake of trying to carry her own tea tray from the breakfast room to the solarium. She had spent too many years apologizing for taking up space to feel comfortable summoning people for simple things. The tray was heavier than it looked. Porcelain rattled. Honey slid toward the edge. "Ma'am," one guard said, stepping forward. "I've got it," Emily whispered, already knowing she did not. Her heel caught the edge of a Persian runner. The tray tipped. A cup struck marble and shattered across the floor, tea flashing gold in the sunlight before it spread like a stain. Silence dropped fast. Two housemaids froze. One of the guards moved. Mrs. DeLuca appeared as if summoned by the sound of broken order itself. For one terrible second, Emily stood in the center of the spill, cheeks burning, breathing shallow, every old humiliation reaching for her at once. Too big, too awkward, wrong room, wrong life, wrong woman. Porcelain crunched softly under Mrs. DeLuca's heel as she stopped at the edge of the spill and let her gaze travel upward with surgical slowness. Sunlight from the tall breakfast windows struck the tea, spreading over the marble, turning the mess almost beautiful for a second, which only made the shame on Emily's face look crueler. The two housemaids lowered their eyes at once. One guard took a step forward, not to help, but to contain. In that house, accidents were treated like signs of character. "No one asked you to touch the Limoges set," Mrs. DeLuca said. The words landed harder than the cup had. Emily bent immediately, breath catching, reaching for the largest shards with bare fingers before anyone could accuse her of standing there uselessly. She had spent too many years learning that speed sometimes softened humiliation, even if it never stopped it. The marble was slick beneath her flats. Her sleeve brushed the tea. A sharp edge kissed the pad of her thumb, and red welled up in one clean bead. Mrs. DeLuca noticed and did not soften. "Careful. Blood stains." That was when the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the sudden shift that happens when real authority enters a space already pretending to have it. A door opened behind the breakfast alcove. Shoes crossed stone with measured weight. The guard who had moved to contain straightened so fast it looked painful. Victor took in everything in a single glance. The broken porcelain, the tea. Emily crouched on the floor, Mrs. DeLuca standing over her, the line of blood bright against Emily's skin. "Step back," he said. No one mistook who he meant. Mrs. DeLuca's jaw tightened a fraction. She mishandled. "I said step back." The room obeyed before pride could argue. Emily did not look up at first. Shame had a way of narrowing the world to whatever was directly in front of a person, and right then all she could see was the shard in her hand and the absurd, humiliating fact that she had bled on someone else's floor before finishing her first full morning in the house. Then Victor crouched in front of her, 6'6" folded down into stillness, broad shoulders cutting the sunlight, and held out a white linen napkin from the table. "Give me your hand." She froze, not from fear of him, from the unfamiliarity of being addressed like she was worth gentleness in front of witnesses. He waited once. No impatience, no command sharpened into cruelty. Emily placed her hand in his. His fingers closed carefully around her wrist, huge and warm, while he wrapped the napkin around the cut with a precision that made it obvious he had done this before. For himself, for other people, maybe for a life rougher than the polished house admitted. The blood vanished into white cloth. "You don't kneel for broken dishes," he said, voice low enough for her, but carrying enough for everyone else. "Not in my house." The silence that followed had edges. Mrs. DeLuca recovered first. "Sir, with respect, staff must understand standards. Familiarity invites disorder." Victor rose slowly, and the distance between his height and hers did the rest. "Then understand one of mine." His gaze never left the housekeeper's face. "No one in this house is to speak to my wife like that again." Wife. The word hit the room like a dropped blade. A grandfather clock in the far hall marked the silence with one dry click after another, each second sharpening what had just been said. The kitchen staff lowered their eyes. Mrs. DeLuca's mouth thinned, but even she understood that a line had been drawn in steel. Emily stood very still beside the ruined breakfast tray, heat crawling up her neck, one hand damp from coffee, the other pressed unconsciously against the edge of the marble island, as if she needed proof that something solid still existed beneath her. In that room, humiliation had changed shape. It no longer belonged only to her. Then the first shot cracked somewhere outside. It did not sound like the movies. It sounded smaller, uglier, closer to a metal door slamming in the wrong universe. A second report followed, then the sharp bark of men shouting through radios. Security alarms began pulsing a hard red glare down the hallway, staining the pale walls with color that looked too much like blood. Emily flinched first. Not backward, forward. The nearest sound had come from the breakfast terrace beyond the tall glass doors, where one of the younger kitchen girls had frozen with a basket of fresh rolls still in her arms. The girl could not have been more than 19. When a third shot punched through the glass, turning one pane into a spray of glittering knives, Emily ran straight toward her. "Down!" The command ripped out of her with such force that even Mrs. DeLuca dropped. Emily hit the girl at the waist, dragging her behind the heavy island as shards rained across the tile. Pain bit instantly through Emily's forearm. A splinter of glass had opened a clean, bright line near her wrist, and coffee mixed with blood as it dripped over her skin. Victor moved an instant later, but not as protector in a polished suit. Something colder came over him. The softness that had appeared in fragments around Emily vanished behind old instincts. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, drew the handgun from the back of his waistband, and signaled 2 guards through the service entrance before the alarm had finished its next pulse. Orders came low, precise, lethal. Lock the west corridor. Seal the rear gate. Find the breach. The room obeyed him because terror had worn his shape long before love ever had. Emily saw it. Not just the weapon, not just the command. She saw how natural it was to him, how his body settled into danger like other men settled into chairs. For one stunned second, the rumors she had tried not to imagine stood alive in front of her. The giant everyone feared was not a misunderstood businessman playing at menace. He was a man built by violence and fluent in it. And still his eyes found her first. He knelt behind the island, one massive hand closing over her bleeding wrist. "Let me see." "It's nothing," Emily said, though her voice shook. "That is not nothing." Glass glittered in her sleeve. The kitchen girl beside her was crying silently into her apron. Emily turned and pulled the girl tighter against her shoulder before Victor could even finish checking the wound. It was a small motion, instinctive and uncalculated. Protect the smaller person. Absorb the fear. Stay useful. Something in Victor's face changed then, not with heat, but with damage. Night pressed against the tall windows like a warning that had finally found the right house. Rain traced the glass in thin silver veins, and somewhere beyond the gates, engines idled longer than they should have. The kitchen had emptied, the broken porcelain had been cleared, and the staff had scattered with the brittle quiet of people who knew a line had been crossed. What remained was sharper than the shattered cup. A choice had entered the house. In Victor's study, the lamps burned low over dark wood and ledgers that smelled faintly of dust, ink, and old control. Emily stood just inside the door, one sleeve still hiding a few glittering grains of glass, while Victor faced the window with both hands braced against the frame. His shoulders looked even larger in stillness, not merely broad but burdened, as if the room itself had been built around the fact of his body and the force of his will. He did not turn when he spoke. "You're leaving tonight." The words landed without anger. That made them worse. Emily stared at his back. For one suspended second, she thought she had misheard him, that this was another test in a house where warmth often arrived disguised as command. Then he crossed to the desk, opened a drawer, and set down a passport, a new phone, a thick envelope of cash, and a set of car keys. Every object was placed with the precision of a man severing his own hand. "There's a driver waiting at the east gate," he said. "He'll take you to a safe apartment in Boston. New name on the paperwork. New bank access. You won't come back here." A pulse beat in her throat. Why? Only then did he look at her, and whatever had shifted in his face downstairs had hardened into something colder and far more painful. Not cruelty. Decision. The kind that bleeds inward. "Because my house is no longer the safest place for you." Rain struck the glass harder. Emily said nothing. Silence, in that room, had become a tool. Victor knew how to use it. So did she now. He moved around the desk and slid a file toward her. Inside were photographs taken through long lenses. The front steps, the kitchen entrance, the small courtyard where she had stood that morning with a basket of linen. In one picture, a blurred figure had circled her face in red ink. In another, the kitchen girl from earlier had been visible in the background. Victor's voice dropped lower. "The leak isn't outside anymore." The room seemed to narrow. He did not give her time to soften the truth. "Someone in my organization passed your routine, your rooms, your habits." Today in the kitchen was not just cruelty. It was pressure. Someone wanted to see how exposed you were. Emily looked from the photographs to the passport, then back to him. The pieces locked together with terrible clarity. All at once, his sharp protection from the past days changed shape. It was not simply possessiveness. It was triage. "You think they'll use me against you," she said. "I know they will." He expected pleading then, or fear, or obedience. Most people, when presented with a well-designed escape, reached for it with both hands. Emily did not. Her fingers rested on the edge of the file instead, steadying the paper as if facts mattered more than panic. Emily lifted her eyes from the file and, for the first time since entering Victor's world, looked at the machinery of his danger without flinching. Rain silvered the study windows. The desk lamp cut a warm circle across contracts, photographs, account ledgers, and a list of shell companies that had been feeding information to his enemies for months. Victor had offered her distance as protection. She answered with attention. "Show me everything," she said. He stared at her as if she had just stepped barefoot onto a battlefield and called it a floor. His first instinct was refusal. It moved through his shoulders, sharpened his jaw, hardened his mouth. But Emily had already opened the file. Her fingers, usually clumsy around crystal glasses and heirloom china, were precise with paper. She began sorting pages by date, by signatures, by the tiny legal inconsistencies most men skipped because they assumed fear mattered more than detail. And there it was. Not in the bloodier pages. Not in the names of gunmen or routes or weapons. In the marriage contract. Emily's contract had been revised 3 days before the ceremony by in-house counsel, supposedly to protect family assets. A harmless amendment, everyone had said. Standard language. But one clause redirected emergency authority over household security and medical decisions, not to Victor's trusted underboss, not to his attorney, but to a holding company chaired by Lorenzo Bellatti's sister-in-law. A backdoor. A silent transfer. If Victor died or was incapacitated, Emily would be isolated inside his own house, legally surrounded before a single guard fired a shot. Victor went still. He did not rage. That would have been easier to watch. Instead, his face emptied with a kind of lethal clarity. Emily had seen him cold before. This was colder. The truth had finally come wearing a suit. "Mrs. DeLuca brought me that revision herself," he said. The room went silent. His mother had not ordered the betrayal, Emily realized. But her contempt had opened the door to it. She had dismissed the bride, dismissed the contract, dismissed the woman reading what no one else respected enough to read. And in that carelessness, the enemy had built a knife inside the marriage itself. Victor reached for his phone. Emily touched his wrist. "Not loud," she said. "If they know we found it, they'll move first." He looked down at her hand on his skin, small against the breadth of him, steady against all that force. Then, slowly he nodded. By dawn, the house had changed shape. No shouting, no visible panic. Breakfast arrived on silver trays. Staff crossed polished floors. Guards rotated at ordinary intervals. But beneath that stillness, Victor stripped the Bilotti network of oxygen. He replaced every shift captain through encrypted orders sent from a burner phone. He rerouted incoming deliveries, froze 3 accounts, and invited Lorenzo to a noon signing in the very room where everyone had once expected Emily to sit quietly and smile. Instead, she sat beside Victor. The long dining table gleamed under cut-glass chandeliers. Lorenzo entered with practiced confidence and 2 attorneys. Mrs. DeLuca came as well, dressed in winter white, prepared to witness what she believed was a strategic settlement. Her eyes landed on Emily first, and old disapproval rose automatically, until she saw the open folders in front of the young woman and the expression on Victor's face. Not indulgence. Trust. Lorenzo smiled thinly. You called this meeting urgently.